In this lecture, I'm going to talk about the historical development of the United Nations. The UN is an international organization comprising 193 member states, which works to ensure peace and promote development across the world. Established in 1945, the UN initially had an explicit focus on global security, but in the latter half of the 20th century, the UN system grew. Today, the UN family comprises many affiliated agencies, funds, and programs which seek to address a wide range of global issues. It is important to consider the organizations that came before the UN. The notion that richer nations had a responsibility to ensure peace for peoples beyond their borders is a long-standing idea, dating back to the Roman Empire. Yet it was not until the early 19th century that such an agreement was seriously attempted. At the 1815 Congress of Vienna, influential ambassadors from England, Austria, Prussia, and Russia signed the Concert of Europe. This was an agreement which saw the so-called great powers of Europe seek to prevent conflict through regular meetings and discussions. The Concert of Europe has often been referred to as the first United Nations, and throughout the 19th century, further countries were added to the original four, including the Ottoman Empire in 1856, Italy in 1867, and the German Reich, replacing Prussia, in 1871. Countries outside of Europe participated as well, including Japan and the United States. The concert enjoyed limited success throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, but collapsed in 1913. Nonetheless, this attempt to resolve grievances without conflict was revolutionary and laid the foundations for later, more successful approaches. Under the Concert of Europe, member states attempted to reach agreements through reference to a shared sense of morality. However, as the 20th century progressed, it became increasingly clear that international cooperation needed to be established in law in order to be truly effective. The first such international organization to be rooted in law was the League of Nations. It was founded in 1920, after the Paris Peace Accords had ended World War I. Woodrow Wilson, President of the United States, had called for a general association of nations and envisioned an agreement between all countries of the world. This would create a utopia whereby all countries lived in peace and harmony with one another. The League was based in Geneva, Switzerland, and by the 1930s it had 58 nations as members. It had ambitious aims. It hoped to resolve disputes via negotiation, thus limiting conflict, as well as improving conditions for the poor. The League of Nations was, by most accounts, a largely unsuccessful experiment in international diplomacy. One of its major limitations was the absence of three of the world's most influential nations at the time, the US, Russia, and Germany. Thus, there were frequent political failures which undermined the efficacy of the organization. Most notably, the League of Nations failed to prevent the outbreak of World War II in 1939. However, the League laid the foundations for the ambitious aims of the future UN, as well as for its promotion of international development. For example, the League aimed to eradicate disease and worked to improve worldwide conditions for children and women. Although these efforts were not entirely successful, the League was the first multinational organization to raise awareness of the problems faced by many in the developing world. In 1945, 6 years after the collapse of the League of Nations, the UN was founded. At the close of World War II, representatives from 50 countries met in San Francisco for the United Nations Conference of International Organization. On the 26th of June of that year, these nations signed the United Nations Charter, and following ratification in October, the modern United Nations was created. This early UN aimed to preserve international peace, provide humanitarian aid, and promote social and economic sustainable development, all through international cooperation. The modern-day UN, based predominantly in New York City and Geneva, is an organization of unparalleled size and complexity. It includes 5 main operating sections, or organs. First, the 193 member states make up the General Assembly, which is the predominant policy-making and decision-making body. Second, 15 member states form the Security Council, which seeks to maintain peace and security across the globe. Third, promotion of sustainable development and economic progress is undertaken by the Economic and Social Council. Fourth, the judicial body of the UN, the International Court of Justice, aims to solve legal disputes through internationally recognized legal norms. Finally, the Secretariat, commonly referred to as the executive arm of the UN, facilitates the day-to-day running of the organization. In the modern era, the UN has broadened and expanded its role, working to promote global development across disparate social issues such as health, education, the environment, women's and children's rights, trade, and migration. In addition to the 5 bodies mentioned previously, the UN family encompasses, for example, the United Nations Development Program, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, the World Food Program, and the UN Conference on Trade and Development. The UN has faced much criticism in its 70-plus years of operation, yet the history of the UN demonstrates how international society increasingly desires to move away from conflict and toward peaceful cooperation and global development. There is great hope among development practitioners in academia that this will become even more the case over the coming decades.